and say welcome one more time. And at this point, I will turn it over to our four hosts. We have Troy Messina, Zeke Kossover, Nathan Powers, and Glenda Delancolo.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Troy Messina. I'm the chair of the AAPT Committee on Laboratories. Somewhere in the chat, there's a link to a Google Doc that has a very short agenda, just sort of introducing ourselves, and then a link to student learning outcomes for labs that are suggested by the AAPT. I thought that might be a good document to ground our conversation. And I'll let the others introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Nathan Powers. I'm at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and I'm the vice chair of the Committee on Labs.
Hello, I'm Glenda Delancolo. I'm from Suffolk County Community College in New York. I'm speaking from Long Island, and I'm here representing the two-year colleges. I have several of our collaborators, our two-year college members over here in the chat, and we are here to also show some of the resources being shared by our community. There's a lot of things that the community has been sharing, and it's very valuable for labs.
And hi, I'm Zeke Kossover. I work for the Science Museum, the Exploratorium in San Francisco. Please come visit us someday when we're back open again, say November. We've made lots of activities and lots of hands-on things, and I was a high school teacher for 21 years before going to the Exploratorium.
So in the Google Doc that was shared is a list of questions, and I maintained the people's names who suggested those topics or questions, mostly because there may be others of you who want to get in contact with them if you want further discussions after this coffee break. So I hope that's okay with everyone that I included your names, because you may have some commonalities in those ideas and questions. There's a pretty large section of them that are just about how do we go about teaching laboratories remotely. So I'm going to open it up to let people, if you have suggestions or ideas, just let people talk.
Troy, maybe I can share the screen and go over a few of the things that have been shared so that we start the conversation going, maybe. Let me see, let me share my screen here. Share screen. All right, so yes, this is the this is the agenda that Troy was sharing with a lot of us. Hopefully you saw the link. And we are addressing, there are many questions that have been sent and they have to do with questions about a lot of them. So how do we actually do these labs, etc.? And I just would like to share the following, just to get the juices flowing and the conversation going. The two-year college committee has a website that is hosted. It's an APT website, and we have been sharing resources here. You click on resources, and this is the links to, we have some general resources here, but this is a link to resources that we've been sharing Zoom meetings since March 20th. Until May 22nd, we've been sharing labs. So for instance, I'm going to just pick one example here. Andrew Young, who is here in this conversation here today, for example, he shared his whole Google Drives on labs. This is for General Physics 1. And I can tell you about, for instance, I have one here, Work in Energy. He has his PDF. And it's all materials that the students can do at home. As you can see, it's a ramp made of paper. And The students need to know the length of that paper tube, and then they just make different inclinations, and he provides in the PDF the entire, say, table that the students need to complete at the end, what was the distance traveled, how long it took for them to travel using a smartphone, etc., just to measure times. He has a few examples of movies of just showing what should be done and what students can do at home. So there are several examples of labs that that were shared here, where students can either use materials at home and do the experiments at home. There are other examples, for instance, over here. This is one that I put together. For instance, I just put for the students, for instance, for the RC constant in a circuit, I just put for them a video. And there's a timer and just 2 voltmeters measure across the capacitor, across the resistors, etc. All the circuit is shown for them beforehand, etc. So, so they will collect the data from the video. So there are examples like this where students can collect data. We also have a very nice, we had a lot of meetings with talks, for instance, on this one. I want to highlight this one here about experiments that a student can collect data at home using cell phone apps, a lot about using cell phone apps, right? And just recently, for instance,
go get my drink.
we had smartphone physics on the rise, right? Paper, APS was talking about it, etc. So, so there's lots of links. We have lots of ideas that we've been sharing, and I invite you all to go take a look. And there are many of us have been using also pivot interactives, right? And I think I have some colleagues here also that can talk about the use of pivot interactives in their labs so these are videos, pre-recorded videos, but the students can make measurements in the videos, so they're more interactive. So these are just some ideas, and there are some resources already here for all of you. I'll stop sharing my screen, and now I just wanted to give you a quick overview. I will post the URL for this on the chat. Thank you.
To add to that, for advanced labs, Alpha Advanced Laboratories Physics Association, I put a link earlier, I can put another link now, has some different resources that they are creating. They're looking into having a Slack channel. They have a listserv that has an archive that you can look at different approaches people are doing, and they're trying to curate a list as well from that discussion of some different advanced lab topics and experiments that can be done. And then I think it looks like we're going to be having for Alpha 5 different 1-hour Zoom meetings that cover different topics. So if you go to that link and be watching it, that Alpha will be providing some additional resources for advanced labs.
I found that in situations where we're doing things that students don't have the equipment to measure at home, for example, thermodynamic labs, sometimes a simulation-based lab can be useful, especially if doing it on the kitchen table would be a little bit dangerous. A pot of boiling water is just not quite as safe as a device we would have in the lab with safety devices on it to prevent it from boiling over. And some students respond well to that. some students pretty much ignore it. Of course, some students ignore all the labs, but they seem to respond better if they're actually seeing it visibly, a real thing happening, and also if there is a person or a person's hands as part of what they see, rather than just seeing a movie of it with no hands in it. Seems to add realism to it. Some of my students have said if they just see a film of it, it's nothing more than CGI. Whereas if they see an instructor, or at least the hands of an instructor, it means a lot more to them.
I'd like to second what Kenneth was just talking about, both parts of it, that I think if you have the combination, especially of a simulation and a video, hadn't thought about the part about showing your face even, probably makes the video more powerful. But I think that the feedback that I got during the last few months was the labs that worked the best educationally were the ones that combined the video so the students could see, here's what it would be like in real life with some kind of a simulation, so they felt like they had ownership and they were really taking real data.
Walter, and I looked at some of the resources you had done, and I know you were wanting to share some of that about you have a book and you have some remote lab resources that you're sharing there. One thing that I actually really liked in watching some of the videos that you had, there was one instance where you said, oh, the reason that this isn't working is because I forgot one thing that I hadn't noticed, and you went and corrected it, but you left it in the video. And I think that's really important. What we're missing out when we're doing videos is we're missing out on students being able to make a mistake and see what that looks like and then correct that mistake. And I think it's great that you're showing that in your videos as well. I know you did it intentionally.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's really important to show that experiments are challenging for everybody. I'm really curious to hear about other people's personal experiences. Kenneth did a great job of kicking that off. Of how things that really worked well that you've tried over the last few months.
Hi, this is Andrew Young. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. If I can just sort of jump in. Thank you, Glenda, for the pointing to the website and the Google Drive. So Andrew Young, Casper College, two-year community college in Casper, Wyoming. And just to give you sort of a reference frame, I'm originally born and bred in Boston, Massachusetts. And so you can, take a rock and throw it in any direction, you'll hit a college. Tufts, Wellesley, Smith, you have Boston University, Boston College. We have 7 community colleges and 1 land-grant university. So that's our higher education complement. I started here in 2005, but we started offering online physics classes back around 2010 as our earliest incarnation. And it's gone over some, maturation and development and evolution over the last 10 years. When we started offering Physics 1, which is your classic mechanics and kinematics and forces and stuff, the online labs were basically converted live labs, which is what Glenda showed you. And so in the classic lab room, we'd have students get together for 3 hours at a time and do the lab. So to port this to the virtual world, what I ended up doing was videotaping all the things I did and taking pictures of all the things that I measured with a ruler, with a balance, and posted them online and had the students glean the data information off the videos and the photos. And so they would do their analysis, write up their stuff, make charts based on what I had done in the lab. So that was a converted live lab experience. For Physics 2, I went sort of a different route. Physics 2, we had thermodynamics and E&M. Physics 2, I used the PhET tutorial. I'm sure most of you know this in Colorado. And they had a whole suite of documents that people would upload for lesson plans and lesson labs. And I used those to give our students the Physics 2 experience in the virtual world. So Physics 1 was converted live labs, and Physics 2 was the digital labs from PhET. Then I got some comments from my colleagues, and there was some pushback in them saying they did not feel comfortable with these labs because they were not a tangible experience, that students were not really rolling the marble down themselves. They were not really boiling the water themselves. And so they did not think that the students were getting the full experience they would in the actual live lab. So from there, I went to using boxed kits. And these are boxed kits that are available from eScience and Hands-On Labs. I'm sure many will know this from boxed kit companies in Colorado. And they basically sell a boxed kit for around $175 or so, give or take. And they contain within the entire content of equipment that students would have to use and to manipulate, and their own lab manuals and procedures of what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And the students would conduct their own labs at home. And I would have the students still write up their answers or their essays and stuff in an Excel file, and they would upload it to me. I would grade it, and then I would give them comments on it and email it back to them. And so that's what we've been doing now, using the boxed kits for our Physics 1 and Physics 2 online experience. But having said that, I also see that there's other companies like Beyond Labs, Labster.com, and Pivot Interactives that Glenda mentioned, that sort of take that initial idea and turn it into a multi-billion-dollar, franchise now with all their assets. And I'm glad to see that there's more acceptance in the commercial world where digital content and converted live lab content is seen as a viable source and process for which students can be initiated and integrated into the physics experience. So that is my little blurb there.
Andrew, the students are paying for the kits themselves, or is it all in a grant, from a grant?
The students are paying for the kits themselves. So they can either buy it directly from the bookstore or they can order online directly from the company.
I may mention something that I did this summer, that we didn't use kits. We had students look at the manual we had before, and they were in groups of 3, and they determined household items that they could use. This was mechanics, so it doesn't work for all labs, but household items that they could use, like soup cans to roll down a ramp. And they designed their own experiments on how they could investigate the content of that lab with what they had at home. And we found that to be fairly effective, as long as all students, I think it was important that all students do some experiment themselves and not just watch their group members. If they were sitting watching their group members, it wasn't as effective.
We've done some work with that at the Exploratorium as well. We worked with some teachers in some school districts around here who had similar sorts of problems, but they couldn't require that the students buy kits. And so we had them look for stuff that they could use at their house, as you just said. But then there were always a few students who didn't have stuff, but we were able to mail out to those few students who didn't have anything. So we sort of call it envelope science. You try to find something that 90% of the kids have, but then you can help out the last 10% by sending it just to them. And that keeps your costs pretty low. One of our teachers also had this really great other addition to it, which was where she took the diversity of experiences of the students and used that as an advantage instead of a disadvantage. So like every student instead of in class, we'll tell every student to put it all at the same, a can roll down an incline. We'll tell them all to put it the same incline, and we'll give every student the same ball to roll down and something like that. But in this case, what we did is we let every student do it whatever way they wanted to, and then submitted their data and a picture of what they were doing through Google Forms. So then we could analyze the big group of data all at once. So we could find like multiple people who had it at the same angle, or different kinds of soup cans that they rolled down to try to get a sense for making sense of the data. And so suddenly, instead of having the few data points that just your group does in class, the students would have 160 data points to look at. And that actually turned out to be, it's a harder way to learn the science than the sort of stepwise approach that we often do, but it gave like so many more data points and things to look at. And it made the students more invested if they knew that one of their classmates was going to be counting on them for looking at data as well.
I just want to second what Zeke said. I'm at a two-year college in Illinois, and we also did a celebrating everyone's diversity kind of lab with pendula and put it all together, and it was pretty stunning how alike all the pendula turned out to be in the end. And everybody really was just kind of in awe, and it was so much better than the classroom when everyone has the same stuff.
So there was a question that came up that was pre-submitted that was maybe related to this, which was if we do go back and we have distanced labs where students are 6 feet apart, all working on their own, is this another scenario where giving students the opportunity to do different things, but then collect the data could be a benefit?
I think there's always an advantage when you can have bigger data sets and reasons for students to keep track of what they're doing, like real scientists do. Like when you ask students to write up in a lab report, this is the things I did in my lab, and they're like, I did what the instructions you gave me were. Like, I don't know why you're making me copy this down back over again. When they're doing things separately, then they need to keep track of it so people can figure out if they did something different. And so that seems like a, like if you have them in a classroom and each kid is separated, or, I'm sorry, they're adults in college, but if each student is all separated out, then they still, you know, if one has some data that's quite different than someone else's, they need to be able to explain what they did to see what, maybe how it turned out differently. So I think that again, once again, there's this opportunity to sort of show in some ways what, you know, the mechanisms of actual science.
I'd like to ask a follow-up related to these experiments using at-home stuff that most of the students already have, and whether there was a challenge in getting all the students to participate, and did you have to do some kind of special follow-up to make sure that they did?
So yeah, there were challenges. We did them synchronous. We had about 6 different groups, and the TAs would go, we had 2 TAs, and they would go between each of those rooms to just check up on what students were doing. That helped a lot to have that. It didn't solve all problems, but we had each student submit their own lab notebook that kept track of the things that they personally did at their home. I think that also was helpful. Groups that decided not to each do their own, even though they were supposed to, tended to participate less than groups that did the experiment individually themselves and then combined their data. And students were actually excited when, for instance, we said, hey, let's say you're doing a rotation lab and you don't all have the same equipment. Each of you has a can that's a different radius. Use that to your advantage. That the thing that you're varying is the differences that you have in your different situations, and try to create an experiment that way. So yes, there were some challenges there, and I don't think we solved them all, but I think there are ways around it.
So Adam has a question.
Hi, Adam Beeler, University of Utah, Salt Lake City. It was more to yours, Mark, about that collective data from the group. We've been discussing that a lot, and just for the group here, some advantages for it. We haven't fully decided. But if a student gets sick or refuses to come in, other groups could still be taking data that the collective can use. Or later, when less and less people are able to come to class, we can still have data for everybody from the few that are willing and able to come. Or they mess up. Or because now they're doing it by themselves, more so than as a group, they might not do it as well as they should have. But if everybody has an opportunity to take data, maybe as a whole we'll all have enough. And they'll feel more humanized and together as a group rather than I'm just taking my own data. And last comment, we've even considered just having like open lab where, okay, a lot of things are online, remote and asynchronous, but there's times where you can come in to have that hands-on experience, and that data that you collect can be used by everybody. So you wouldn't even have to keep it as, oh, everybody's doing their own little thing at specific times. We're thinking of doing something along those lines for one of those advantages.
In the chat, a few people were talking about a scale, and one thing I did a little bit more this last, kind of while we're online, was doing a little bit more emphasis on the uncertainty. That's always an important part of lab, but this is the first time I used like a Python worksheet. We have an uncertainties library that works really well. I'm not sure if you guys have tried that, but you can just plug in your data and then it does all the math for you in terms of propagating error, and which was like, this was for like the pre-med group where I don't usually go all through that. But then it was nice, like we were trying to use a scale and it was like nobody had a scale. So we had just done like the torque lab. So then they like made a scale that was not very accurate, but then did the propagation of error with it. So it was actually kind of a neat learning experience of sometimes in lab we just have such good equipment, it's like, oh, the scale's right. And here there was actually some uncertainty to it that it was important to propagate like the error and see different pieces, like for a buoyancy lab.
I'm going to put a link in the chat, but rather remarkably good scales have gotten very inexpensive. For $15, you can get a 2,000 gram total 0.1 gram resolution scale. We've got calibration weights at the Explo, and we've bought maybe 50 of these for teachers over the last several years, and they have never been off by more than 0.1 or 0.2 grams. They're small, they eat batteries and all that, but they are still surprisingly good. You can't drop them on the floor, but you can't drop an OHAU scale on the floor either. So they're great. And we also do have a lab on an activity online for making your own microgram balance with straws and paper clips, if that's something that you're interested in getting into.
Yes, please share that.
We're online. You don't actually have to have gloves on. I can't contaminate you over the internet.
I'm actually in my office on campus because I'm doing some filming for some video labs that we're doing. I'm Austin Hedman. I'm at University of California, Berkeley. We're doing some video labs to get us through the summer as we ramp up for fall.
Well, I have to say, I didn't have a lot of a chance to really try a lot of different labs at the end of the spring, spending more time just trying to figure out what to do to keep the class doing anything. Finding a lot of these ideas interesting. Any comments or thoughts on time taken to get the students to, for lack of a better word, accept them? Or to explain to them how to use it, such as the scale with the straws.
So
Sorry,
I could say a couple of things about online. I think everything took longer. Everything that you could explain in 1 minute if you were with them took 10, by a factor of 10 at least. Everything took longer to explain. I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas for online or remote, like an Ohm's Law lab, I really want my students to have to touch a digital multimeter, and they're pretty cheap, but I can't figure out how can I can't afford to give them all a power supply. I'm making some kits, but how can I make the voltage? I can't figure out the voltage. Short of batteries, I guess. Thought if anybody had any ideas about that.
So what's your opposition to batteries?
They're heavy to ship and expensive.
I mean, AA's are 25 cents each, so not too bad. You could give them 2032s, which are 3 volts. They'll eat them pretty fast if the resistor, if the thing is a pretty big load. But we've used AA's, and we've had students use you know how some rulers have like a slot, or like have a divot in them in the center of the ruler, like a place to hold your fingers. If you put the batteries in them, they won't roll away. And then we cut up Christmas lights and mail them. Because you can get a roll of Christmas lights for 50 for like, I don't know, $8 or $9, or 100 rather, for $8 or $9, and then you can chop them up and send them. They heat up, so they don't follow Ohm's law super great, but they work all right. And then there are these things called grain of wheat bulbs, which are even cooler because they go up to, you can buy 6-volt grain of wheat bulbs for about 25 cents or so each. And so a 6-volt one will still light up at 1.5 volts, but it's hard for students to burn them out. So the Christmas lights are about 2.5 volts each.
And that's good for showing like series and parallel brightness, or
Yeah. Once again, they're a little bit difficult. You can actually show with the multimeter that their resistance, cold and hot, can't be the same, because you can measure that the current is wrong if assuming the resistances were the same between them. But they work pretty well. They're light. They are pretty tough. They rarely, the grain of wheat bulbs can you mail totally fine because they're tiny. They're really hard to break. The Christmas lights are still pretty tough through the mail.
So I was also worried about if I use really low voltages and there's going to be such a small current, that really cheap DMMs might not be very good at measuring the small current. So I was a little bit worried about that. Because in the lab, you go up to 20 volts sometimes with a big fat resistor and you get nice data.
Yeah, you can actually you can tear apart computer power supplies, or like wall warts for a lot of computers have 12 and 19 volts on them. And so you can get them. USB is 5 volts and 3.3 volts. The problem is that USB usually checks for shorts, and a lot of things that you do will be a short, but it looks like there might be a link to an actual power supply that's handy. That maybe is not so, maybe does a worse job.
That's a pretty limited USB powered breadboard power supply, but I've used it before. If you use large enough resistors, the students aren't likely to cause a problem with their computer.
Oh, that looks really nice. Yeah, I mean, a computer can do 200 milliamps. So that's usually plenty.
Maybe the trickiest part is you have to jumper to get the 5 or the 3.3, so you'd have to probably make a video for students to see how to do that.
You could. Do you include a jumper with it, or is it moving one around that's already there?
I think you move it. I can't remember.
You move it. It's those little yellow thingies in the picture.
Oh, okay.
Those are little jumpers, and you can either put it where they are right now or scoop it over to the next two, and that switches the voltage on it.
And it has this DC in plug here. Does that mean if I have like a spare thing that'll fit it, it will regulate it to 3.3 or 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Because you can get wall warts for free at Goodwill. Like if you just show up there, they will hand you all the ones you want.
Doesn't everybody have like a big box of those in the basement? Because I do.
Yeah, and it's pretty flexible, 6.5 to 12 volt wall wart.
So there's some good conversation in the chat about using Tracker and video analysis software for students to record their own video at home. What's people's experience with that process?
So I did it for like trying to do a lab on air resistance, right, where they drop like coffee filters and then you can stack them to increase the mass, and you can look at terminal velocities as a function of mass and all this stuff. And I didn't use Tracker, but I just used the Pasco Capstone software, which has a tracking functionality to it too. And it worked pretty well. I mean, granted, students had done a motion sort of capture lab earlier in the semester when we were still live, so.
We did video analysis on Vernier, and we had students that were already having difficulties with their computers not having enough speed to even get the video up, that the video tracker was not effective. So we found that it was more effective for them to just click. It just took too much time if they were going to do video tracker.
You mean the auto tracker feature versus just selecting the pixels one at a time?
Yeah, the auto tracker versus just clicking for yourself the position. They just preferred just clicking it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, at the frame rates that you're usually doing lab, or the speeds that you're doing labs, you're going to get like 30 frames or something for any given experiment usually.
Yeah, I did.
Done it, but I've heard that using the Vernier video option, where you, as something falls, you put the little dots on the screen. I've heard that that can work quite well. I don't know if that's what you're talking about by Tracker, but filming it as something falls and then having the students within the Logger Pro program or graphical analysis, every slide or every other slide mark where the object is, and then get position, velocity, and acceleration from that.
Yeah, Tracker and ImageJ are just free versions of being able to do that motion analysis.
Okay.
I have a little experience with Tracker. Well, actually, I guess it's not Tracker's fault. It's more the iPhone's fault. We were doing some filming where I had my students put their phone in slow-mo or high speed, where it doubles the frame rate from 60 to 230 or something like that. And we started to suspect that that whatever that higher frame rate wasn't actually constant, that it was 230 or 232 or 227, and that messed things up a little bit. But it was an interesting discovery for students to not believe things that Apple publishes.
Yeah, this was several years ago, but the iPhone frame rates are not stable at all, and they're dynamically adjusted for lighting and all kinds of stuff. Like, they give you really wonky results sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know how many times my students have measured G to be 12, 11, 13 seconds squared.
I'm very relieved to hear you say that about the iPhone, because I get my students in physics to do the homework with the Tracker, and it's basically to get them to use Tracker, so I don't have to do that in AP, and I can just get them to do the AP stuff. And I've had students who've told me I'm completely wrong with my software because their phone is correct in what it's doing. So yeah, that's been an interesting discussion. It took me a little while to figure out what was going on, but I think in relation to the earlier question about it, I think it's super helpful, and I've not had any problems with students doing this as a home-based activity. I think it's one of the more sort of genuine things that they can do. But I will throw in there was a thing I did see going back to the thermodynamics about using, I don't know if anybody has been used or suggested, we finished now, so I haven't done it, using kitchen thermometers or using thermometers that they use for like checking meat. Someone did replicate, someone in the UK I know replicated the Joule heating by shaking metal lead shot and stuff, and then measuring the temperature rise with a kitchen thermometer, and it worked remarkably well. So I haven't done it myself.
I found that a lot of my students don't have kitchen thermometers. They pretty much use a lot of them only cook by microwave. Literally.
Well, that's an entirely different set of experiments, some of which are probably a little bit dubious,
Yes.
involving light bulbs and things like, the Christmas lights and soap. I used to put soap in the microwave. I don't know if anybody's tried that. It explodes. Kind of cool, but it smells, and you can't really use your microwave afterwards.
It can be very good.
And the grapes.
Yeah.
Grapes are cool. The plasma. But I don't think that's kind of what we're talking about here, but you just reminded me.
No, but something can be useful in there is butter. If you take out the rotator and just put butter on the bottom and you let the microwaves go, if you get it oriented correctly, you can see the waves form and measure the wavelengths of the microwaves.
And the speed of light.
Yeah.
But you guys, I've noticed the frequency isn't always listed on the back of the microwaves here. I had to go look it up.
They're all the same is the problem.
It's all the same.
They're all the same. Yeah, so you can't get two different points. At least Mark gave an idea of looking at a commercial house last week about it.
Oh, okay.
And if they have internet access, which they would have to have if they're doing online, they can look up the individual microwave on the internet to find quite a few specifics about it.
It was just really cool because they could, we do it with chocolate, just because it's more fun. And then they measure they take that measurement and then they turn the microwave around and read the thing off the back. That's all. It was just a small thing. But I really like these IKEA thermometers in the chat. Thank you for those, that idea.
We did it in activity where we had students make different kinds of fudge and varied each one took one of the ingredients out or varied it. And so we needed, the Exploratorium needed something like 90 thermometers. IKEA didn't break the price even a penny for us, by the way, when we bought 90. But they survived a day on the floor of the Exploratorium, so they seemed pretty tough.
That reminds me of a little engineering lab I used to do with like Laffy Taffy, I think you call it here, where like making beams and strengthening, but that's a little dodgy in terms of the temperature of that by the time you heat it up. So I don't know, probably not a good idea at home. You can imagine what's happening.
So I might share something. We had one idea. We had a local meeting of different universities in Utah recently, and I think that was a great idea to have in your local community where your restrictions are probably very similar, to have some conversations about plans for fall. I wanted to share some ideas for those of you. Some of you may have some opportunity to do in person in the fall, and I thought there were some ideas that were maybe important for that. One is to be flexible because things could change mid-semester. So have backup plans, maybe different color levels, red and orange and yellow, of what your plan is if that occurs, if something occurs. Also, some ideas about like front loading or back loading experiments, so that you know that certain experiments that require in person can be done in the time frame in which you may be in person, and so you can get those done with. And then planning on flexibility, like if a student gets sick, that they might be 2 weeks in isolation. So planning that flexibility. And then the other thing, my plan personally for in-person labs is to purchase a bunch of plastic sheeting, because we know that we need to be about 6 feet apart. I saw that in our lab space, our tables are about 4 feet wide, which puts people comfortably sitting at about 6 feet away from each other. But we decided that it's compliance that's going to be the biggest issue, students keeping the mask on at all times and people keeping their distance. So we decided what we'll do is buy plastic sheeting like they have in the grocery stores and place it in the middle of the lab table, but with a little gap to be able to pass some things under, and have it go all the way up to the table, and maybe put some plastic sheeting between lab stations as well. So we're trying to consider some things like that that might allow us to do more in person, because for especially the advanced labs, we felt things are very difficult. Other than doing a few maybe remote resources using a few remote resources online and things like that, they would be very difficult. So anyway, those are some ideas that came out of that meeting for me.
In terms of contingency plans, earlier I talked about for Physics 1, we used to have the converted live labs, and it took quite a while to take all those videos and pictures because, you know, how's the lighting, how's the angle, is it in focus, how's the audio recording and post-editing and all that stuff. And switching over to the box kits, you know, I had to say goodbye to my converted live labs for a little while. And then I gave it a second life, where I'm sure many of us have students who basically, you know, do, you know, sports, they're a volleyball team, or they're on the debate team, maybe they get sick, or they have a large workload and they come to the lab. So, you know, that's fine, do whatever you need to do, but the student still wants to do the lab. So classically, I would have to reset all the equipment, get the consumables, make an arrangement with the student to sit there for 3 hours, and then disassemble everything, grade the lab, and that would be the makeup lab process, which is fine for one student over a semester. But of course, a lot of students have different issues they have to deal with. So I ended up having to reassemble a lot of labs and such. But with the physics converted labs, I use that as the makeup lab now. So if a student misses a lab for, you know, hockey or volleyball, it's like, that's fine, you know, go do your event. Here's your makeup lab. And now, you know, that minimizes a lot of the setup and the execution process of trying to reset everything else for the students. Now I see that for fall, our president just sent out email saying we're doing live classes, but prepare for online conversion. And so we're going to have, you know, standard physics labs that are live. They come and do their stuff. But if somewhere like in October, November, they make the call saying go online, well, now I have the backup of my makeup labs, converted live labs, that I can use as a alternate now for students to do, so that we have some semblance of continuity of education in such a weird state that we're in right now.
So I have a question that I have been kind of asking periodically at these sessions, which is, you know, we have a lot of conversations about labs and getting students involved in the process of research and investigation, but particularly if under this kind of social distancing side of things, if they're in person, but even if they're at home working, it's difficult to generate that communal process of working on a lab together. And I'm curious if anyone's explored the way in which students can work together asynchronously without the instructor to complete investigations or something like that.
So I had my advanced lab this spring when we went on break. And luckily we had just done some data collection for a thin films lab that was new that I read in an AJP, and I thought, well, that'll be a cool lab. And it was just one of those kind of, let's see how it goes. And we kind of just ended up making it a class project. The author of the AJP had a MATLAB code, and I said, okay, make it a Python code. So they converted a Python code, and they had to collaborate a lot to get it to work. You know, so they spent a lot of time on Zoom without me, just working on the code and figuring out how to analyze the data. So I think that to me is about as close as I'll get to kind of a lab group, because they were doing stuff, they just weren't, you know, in the lab.
I'm planning to use Microsoft Teams so they can sort of chat back and forth and get notifications on their phone when someone posts to it.
Yes, I'm interested to hear about Teams, but also then there was in the chat, but also I've read about it recently too, that Google Meetup is trying to expand into a lot of the features that we like about Zoom. And I think that will be beneficial for a lot of K-12 school districts in particular that initially were skeptical of Zoom's privacy features, so they banned it from use, and it stranded a lot of high school teachers using tools that weren't as effective.
I don't really like Teams. I mean, we use Teams for the business, like upload, download files, grading, and all that stuff. Like, I'm never going to take up another lab journal again in my life. I'm just going to have them upload the pages every day when they're done. I don't know why I haven't been doing that before. But you can't see everybody on Teams. If you have more than 4 people in your class, you can't see them all. I think they're going to 9, but we met by Zoom and did all the business on Teams, which I like very much.
If it was just students working together and maybe without the faculty, I know Discord, and I don't know about licensing and things like that, but Discord, they can do a lot of chatting and even sharing screens and things like that through Discord, or maybe Slack does the same thing. But if it was just students meeting up asynchronously from everybody else, that might be an option.
My wife teaches physiology in community college, and in the end of the semester, it always been students doing their own physiology labs, physiology project. They picked something to test, and she did hers online this year, just like everyone else did. And actually, they turned out much better because she gave them very poor instructions. It turns out that if you give your students poor instructions, sometimes they come up with their own best solutions, and so. She just told them that they needed, this is what we used to do, make the adjustments you need to be able to do this online, and best of luck with that. And different groups did different ways of meeting up with each other, and that suited whatever worked for their group. Some of them did Snapchat, some did Slack, some did Discord servers. One even made a private Reddit group for doing it so that they could like upvote and downvote suggestions from each other. It was ridiculous. In any case, the key was not giving, she said the key was that there was only a goal, a final product that they had to have. That's what she specified. And she didn't specify the mechanisms, but how they would get there, the way she would have if she was in the classroom with them.
Maybe I'll add one other thing. I've thought of this kind of as a feature in some ways, like the in-person is not there. But think about what we might teach students about long distance collaborations that they might be part of. And I think this is a really important thing if we can help them learn that skill. And then again, we started with some of the AAPT recommendations for labs. I think it's important that we say what features does this present for us in terms of doing labs. So maybe we focus more on analysis and start thinking about areas maybe that we haven't focused on so much, where we've replaced it with like teaching a certain piece of equipment, and that we say, how can we really take advantage of this situation to advance our ability to teach other aspects of labs?
I used quite a bit of analysis in mine because it was about the only thing I could really work on with the thermodynamics. And because we have Logger Pro at the college, every student has free access to download it to their computers. And once it's on their computer, it's on there forever. It's excellent for analysis. But I found out recently a very easy way to get a graph from Logger Pro or any other sort of analysis program into a document. I had not thought about this. Is just the Snipping Tool that a lot of computers have, or something comparable to it, where you just, I'm not sure exactly what it does, but like taking a photo of the, what is the word called? Screenshot. And then pasting it into a document works much better than trying to do any sort of copy and paste, and gives much better results, much clearer picture. And the students are much more able to play around with it and get it just where they want it in the document. So if you're going to get into analysis, the Snipping Tool that I know Windows has it, and I believe Apple has something comparable to it. I just don't know what it's called. But it works really well with analysis, getting tables and graphs over into the document. So if you're going to go in analysis, it can be a useful thing to use.
I would like to second Nate's idea too. We revisited our learning outcomes and the scientific practices that were most important to us. And even though there were some things we would have ranked at higher priority, because of this situation, we realized they could get messed up. So we really focused on, hey, it's more about the group work, coming up with things together, like developing a research question. What are they going to do? How are they going to analyze it? Claim, evidence, reasoning, the communication. How do you represent data versus evidence using graphs or tables, different representations. So it's less about the data taking. So if the in-person data, sorry to say it, physics content is out the window because we can't meet in person, we can still focus on maybe more the scientific practices as opposed to the content and the data taking.
So we might actually end up following the AAPT's good practices guidelines, is what you're saying.
Yep, or at least more so than we probably most of us currently are.
Has anyone tried exploring students giving video presentations about lab write-ups? Meaning, the traditional lab write-up, they submit it, they write it. There's value in writing, absolutely. I'm not saying there isn't, but as another alternative to the writing skill is to emphasize the presentation skill. And particularly if you have students working in groups from a distance, have you explored having students give kind of visual reports of their labs? I see Adam.
Yeah, yes.
And Tony.
We haven't, not fully, because it was just the very end of spring, but we do with argument-driven inquiry. If people are familiar with that, ADI, argument-driven inquiry, where they emphasize the CER process, claim, evidence, and reasoning. So we had to have an argumentation session where they write out all that on a whiteboard and then tell it to other people in the class. And now we are going to do that as a video. Record yourself, post it, and then people can give feedback, comment, or whatnot.
I just had this as part of my first lab in physics for my majors. One of the lab reports, they have to do a PowerPoint. They're terrible, but it's good practice. It's a good start.
We had a thought of a good way to maybe use videos during this time. If students are able to come in individually and do things that we might actually use going forward after this is for certain mastery things like soldering, to have the students videotape themselves soldering and explaining the reasons they're doing certain things as they solder and what indicates that it's a good solder. And then to submit those as their evidence of mastery so that that can be offline from other lab activities that we do. And there may be other mastery type lab activities that students could do alone and film them.
Do you ever have other students do like peer review of that? Oh, sorry, you're talking too, Tony. So have you ever had other students do like peer review of the videos?
We actually haven't done this yet, so I think that would be a good idea. But we haven't done it yet, so it's something that we'll look into.
So, I mean, that's something that they did when I was my last year in grad school at Georgia Tech, and they had, like 1,800 students submit video lab reports, and then they were all peer reviewed and graded by other students, and there's a whole literature on calibrated peer review in physics labs. I forget, I think it's maybe out of Stanford, UCLA, something like that. And so you have all these sort of like training videos where you sort of teach students to understand what a good video is, what a good video report is, and then they just kind of, each student gets assigned like 5 random videos or 10 random videos or something, I forget. And they actually go in and then you do some kind of statistical averaging over a bunch of different peer reviewers. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on.
I was just going to ask you, Nathan, if this is going to be like a kit thing where you would send home a soldering kit with students if they can't be in person. That would be kind of pricey, I think.
Right. No, and I think, I mean, this was a pretty recent idea that we had. We actually will have some in person at least during the semester, we think. And so this was one way that we could allow students to do some mastery pieces. We'd schedule different times throughout the day that they could come individually and use our equipment. But there could be other types of mastery that are less pricey that could be done at home, I was thinking.
So we're actually at UVU putting together, depending on who's teaching the class, but I know some of our instructors of the lower division labs, the physics principles labs, are actually putting together some kits where you can get some inexpensive things, get, an Arduino Nano for $3 and hook up, a photo gate to that and see how fast something's moving. Or use, I think Adam Beeler was the one who mentioned in a previous meeting I was at that you could use the program Tracker to, film things on the phone. For the advanced lab, I actually, anyway, their goal is to make kits like for $25 that the students can take home. I'm teaching our advanced lab and I have a bigger budget. So I have like a couple $100 per kit that I've gotten budgeted. And there's some cool things out there. Like I say, for $3 you can get an Arduino Nano and wire a lot of things up to it. Analog Devices has a couple devices. They're the ADP I think it is 1000 and 2000. I'll get the correct name and paste it into the chat. But one of them is $37 and one is like $167, I think. And basically it's a thing you plug into the USB port on your computer and suddenly you get an oscilloscope, 2-channel oscilloscope, 2-channel function generator, some power supplies, some digital I/O. So kind of a very inexpensive way to get some lab equipment at home. I know a lot of people are actually using them in their labs at their university just because they're cheaper. But so there are some options to take some experiments home, even some advanced lab kind of experiments.
Please give us
So-
that link, please.
So we are coming to the end of our hour, and we always go over by a little bit, and I think that speaks to the great conversations and the sharing of resources and things. So I appreciate everyone showing up again. I appreciate our 4 hosts. They did an amazing job, I think, of sharing the resources that they compiled in their own knowledge. So thank you to them. Next week, we'll be back, as always. Next week, we shift to the earlier time of 4, and I hope everyone can join us again then. So once again, thank you, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.